Good morning, everyone. Happy celebration of the Paris Agreement. My name is Virginia Fiume. I'm the coordinator of Humans, one of the organizations that is promoting this very special conference. Before Marco Cappato introduction, just a few words for those of you who are starting to follow the live stream on the social media channels. Today, we're going to have a panel that is going to be interpreted and translated in English and in Italian. So for those of you who want to follow the conference in Italian, you can follow Marco Cappato Facebook page or the YouTube channel of Associazione Luca Coscioni, which is one of the promoters of the initiative. And for those of you who are following in English, stopglobalwarming.eu and Humans are going to transmit in English. Today, we are going to have a very high-end panel that Marco is going to introduce, which is part of the initiatives organized by the European Citizen Initiative stopglobalwarming.eu. You can have a look at the initiative. It's a proposal for a carbon pricing in the European Union that all EU citizens can sign to submit an official proposal to the European Commission to discuss this law that we will be part of the topics that will be covered today. So you can, I invite all of you to share this live streaming to have as much coverage as possible, but also during or at the end of the event to share the link to the website stopglobalwarming.eu, which is the official collection system for this important initiative toward the European Commission. For the speakers, you can choose the language that you want to speak. Thanks to our interpreters, we can cover Italian and English. And also, you are more than welcome to stay with us for the entire conference in the Zoom panel where you are in. You can pick up the language to listen with the globe symbol that you find at the bottom of the page. So you are more than welcome to stay with us for the entire duration of the conference. Without too much further ado, the floor to Marco Cappato, President of Humans and co-promoter of stopglobalwarming.eu. Welcome everyone.
Grazie a Virginia Fiume. Ricordo anch'io questa volta in italiano la possibilità di seguire.
Thank you, Virginia. You can follow the celebration of the 5 years of the Paris Agreement, both in Italian and English. Speakers can choose on the Zoom channel the language you prefer. And it's also possible to follow the live streaming on the social media on my Facebook page and on the Luca Coscioni Association channel, and in English on the stopglobalwarming.eu and Humans sites. I think we can start with a video sent by the President of the European Parliament, David Sassoli. After his introduction, I'll rapidly take the floor to introduce this session. We have with us Mogens Lykketoft, former President of the UN General Assembly at the time of the Paris Agreement, Navi Pillay, former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Emma Bonino, former EU Commissioner and Minister of Foreign Affairs in Italy, then MEP Yannick Jadot, rapporteur on the carbon border adjustment, and we have with us Flavia Pansieri, former United Nations Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, Carlo Corazza, head of the European Parliament office in Italy, Eleonora Evi, MEP, and Monica Frassoni, former MEP and President, Chair of the Green Group at the European Parliament. So it is my pleasure to hand over to David Sassoli, President of the European Parliament. I would like to start by thanking Marco Cappato for organizing this conference and by greeting all friends. 5 years ago, the Paris Agreement was signed. Since that historic agreement, we have embarked upon a courageous path to tackle the problem of climate change with determination. It hasn't been easy. There have been different sensitivities, clashes, but during these 5 years, everyone has become more and more aware that we're living in a historic emergency, and the EU member states, cities, and citizens have slowly set in motion and committed themselves make the problem of climate change and environmental degradation a priority on the European and national political agendas. And the same has been true for the institutions that have gradually become aware that everyone's goal is to save the planet, in particular young people. Young people all over the world have felt the weight and responsibility of what is happening to our planet and have demonstrated the importance of this challenge for them. 5 years ago, the European Union took the lead in the fight against climate change. Today, we continue to do so. We have launched ambitious legislation to develop the agreement at European and national levels. And of course, a year ago, with the presentation of the European Green Deal, Europe took the lead in the fight against climate change. For us, this represents a turning point of these years because we have an ambitious goal, a goal to be achieved in the medium and long term, to become the first climate neutral continent. The commitments we have set ourselves have not disappeared with the outbreak of the pandemic. On the contrary, it has given us an opportunity in this dramatic situation to rethink our social and economic model in a more sustainable, greener, fairer way. The Paris Agreement was the starting point because it allowed the beginning of a global debate on how we want to be and where we want to go. And today we must renew our commitments. By the end of the year, all parties must review their national determined contributions, and things are very clear. The European Union must be at the forefront. It must set out the objectives to be achieved, and this must be done for our citizens, for future generations. We want to be an example. The European Parliament has called for a 60% reduction in emissions by 2030. It's a very ambitious target, and it is essential that these targets are translated by nation states into projects, into programs to support change efficiently and sustainably. Rising global temperatures will have a devastating impact on nature, causing irreversible changes in our ecosystems and the loss of our biodiversity. This is happening at a very fast pace. Higher temperatures and more intense meteorological events will cost the European economy enormously, as well as hampering production capacity itself for our countries. Climate change is a global challenge that requires a global response. This is why Europe alone cannot succeed, but must set an example to all, and we must all engage in this great battle. In recent years, we have all committed ourselves to achieving certain goals. What was extraordinary yesterday is becoming the norm today. At the beginning of 2021, countries that produce more than 65% of global carbon dioxide emissions will strive to achieve carbon neutrality. But this must not slow us down. It's a race against time, and we are a little later. Our commitments must be followed by concrete proposals because greater ambition means economic plans, recovery measures, and the ability to create jobs. The Union wants to help raise global ambition and is leading by example. The Green Deal and Next Generation EU are our opportunities right now to go in the direction we have indicated. And we want to run because we feel the need for a world that is healthier, cleaner, but also and above all fairer. Environmental challenges can only be solved, and much depends on us, if we can put the issue of reducing inequalities at the center of our political action. Climate challenges and inequalities go hand in hand with a just transition that will protect our citizens, because we do not want anyone left behind. Working for a fairer society is possible and worthwhile, because an unequal society fuels the ecological crisis. We need courageous changes, massive investments. We need to involve our companies to succeed in this enterprise of supporting a green transition. Thank you all for your commitment. Thanks to Marco, to all friends. Of course, I hope to meet you soon, and good work. Thank you to the President of the European Parliament, David Sassoli. And Sassoli's words have been pronounced a few hours after a major agreement has been achieved at the Council of Ministers of the European Union, an agreement on a reduction of 55% versus 1990 levels, reduction of CO2 emissions by 2030. In introducing the debate, and before handing over to Mogens Lykketoft, I'd like to emphasize that whatever we think about the objective and of the decision defined by the European Union, because of course somebody's being critical. There are those who believe that the choice made is too ambitious. Others, with good reasons, think that these good intentions leave have too much room for a slow transition, transition that is slower than needed in order to achieve the limitation of the increase in global temperature to 1 degrees Celsius. And this was defined, of course, in the Paris Agreement. I'd like to mention what Laurent Fabius said. He was the chair of the international convention leading to Paris Agreement, and Laurent Fabius has recently stated that there has been a revolution in climate change worldwide at the international level, considering what the Chinese government and the South Korean government have stated, and considering what is happening in Europe and in the States after the election of Joe Biden. And Fabius also stated that the real issue is now the implementation of Paris Agreement. This is the right time to take action. That's why today we are here not only to celebrate the 5 years of Paris Agreement, but also this is a call for action, as mentioned by Virginia Fume at the beginning of this webinar. We have a European Citizens Initiative that can be signed by all European citizens on the www.stopglobalwarming.eu. This European Citizens Initiative goes hand in hand with the organizations of the European Environment Bureau, the biggest network of environmental and civic associations, 160 of them, grassroots organizations representing over 35 countries. And the European Environmental Europe refers to the ETS directive. This directive has to be reformed in order to reach a carbon price of at least 100 euros per ton, and this before 2030. In our proposal, we call for action in order to reach this objective by 2025. And I'm sure that Yannick Jadot, who's the European Parliament rapporteur on the carbon border adjustment, I'm sure he will talk about this together with Eleonora Evi. And this is connected to the use of resources and to the need for investments in order to speed up energy transition. Also, social investments are needed in order to make energy transition more sustainable, as mentioned by David Sassoli, because of course the struggle against climate change should not worsen inequalities. On the contrary, it should lead to a fairer society. Now, I'd like to invite our speakers and listeners to share this live stream broadcast.
Former president of the United Nations General Assembly at the time of the Paris Agreement, former Minister of Finance in Denmark, and he also accepted to launch a picture campaign, sharing a picture of himself with the Stop Global Warming logo. And this is very important because it's nowadays impossible to go out in the street to demonstrate. It's so difficult to demonstrate here in our room, in our home, but maybe it is thanks to those tens of millions of people who demonstrated in the street that the agreement in Europe has been achieved, maybe even if not sufficient. So thank you, Morgans, for your courage and your availability. And of course, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Let me start by quoting the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, saying, "We are facing a devastating pandemic, new heights of global heating, new lows of ecological degradation, and new setbacks in our work towards global goals and for a more equitable, inclusive, sustainable development. To put it simple, the state of the planet is broken." Secretary General is right. We are at a high speed on the wrong track. Stopping climate change is the most urgent task to change this. Without stopping global warming, the spiral will be irreversible, out of control, and create devastating blows to our civilization. Hundreds of millions of people will be forced to migrate, be climate refugees, because glaciers providing fresh water for many hundred millions of people will melt down, ocean levels will be rising, deserts will be increasing much faster than we see already. And much more conflicts will follow the explosion of unregulated migration. Therefore, we have a lot of very heavy lifting to do in the international cooperation, in national and local governments, in the business community, and in civil society to change the course of the globe. And we have a strong obligation to our children and grandchildren to do that, to act now, and to act with sufficient force. As active members of civil society, as consumers, as producers, and as voters, we have to act. Politicians all over must be told that the majority of us will not vote for those who hesitate to save the next generation in order to win the next election. In a very short period of time, we must fundamentally change the pattern of production and consumption, and in particular, the way we produce energy. We knew that already 5 years ago, of course, when the UN General Assembly during my term as president approved the 17 goals for sustainable development, and we had the Paris Climate Agreement. The Paris Climate Agreement was by far the strongest commitment to fight against climate change ever reached in the international community. It was a moment of great hope, in spite of the fact that we all knew even that was not enough. The agreement was the result of tireless work from the then UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, from Christiana Figueres of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and my friend Laurent Fabius, the French foreign minister, who was president of the COP21. But it would not have happened without that also being the moment of common understanding between the United States, China, and Europe. My observation in Paris was, going around talking with the negotiators, that when I asked, what about that country being hesitant, that country being hesitant, the answer was always, US will take care of them, or China will take care of them. And that was what happened. And what is the situation now 5 years ago? Well, national governments have not nearly done as much as they committed themselves to do in Paris. In the last year, all attention has, for obvious reasons, been on the corona pandemic. But worst of all, in the past 4 years, Donald Trump has been the president of the United States. He took the US out of Paris. He demolished a lot of the Obama administration's work to regulate away from carbon emissions. But in spite of all government hesitation, in spite of corona, in spite of Trump's destruction, the issue of climate change is now at the very heart of everything. We have seen major cities, big and small companies, civil society, also in the US, investing heavily in the fight against climate change. And now we have a president-elect in the US committing to come back to Paris, invest heavily in climate. We have recently heard the Chinese president reaffirming his commitment to the Paris Accord. And we have, as you have already mentioned, in the European Union just this week, the approval of a very ambitious goals for reduction of the CO2 emissions in 2030. What we need now is that all important agents commit themselves to use the most efficient tools to reach these goals. We know that rapid change of energy supply to renewables is possible and can be much cheaper than today in the economics of scale that will happen and still improved technologies. Just remember that a solar cell, which had the price of 100 12 years ago, has a price of 5 now. But what we must be sure of is that the impetus to invest and consume in a sustainable way is strong enough. And that's why we need to implement gradually up to 2030 a high tax on climate gas emissions, so that every investor knows already now that sustainable behavior will be more profitable and unsustainable behavior will be more costly. You also have to realize that there are 2 important leaks from introduction of carbon tax we must avoid. We must be sure that the burden sharing is just and fair, and we must always try to avoid leakage of jobs just crossing the borders to other regions instead of adapting to carbon neutrality. Inequality and social instability has risen in the past decades in Europe and in the United States and all over the world. We cannot maintain popular support for the necessary climate action if the consequences is more burdens on people with small incomes and low wages. We have to return most of the revenue from a carbon tax to lower taxes on the low-income people or create better welfare for those groups. But we also know to a degree that part of the revenue from a carbon tax should be used to ease the transition for those productions most dependent on fossil fuels today, and providing new qualifications for those people who will have to leave old job positions to take up new. I sincerely hope that we act with high speed and with basic understanding of all this. If we do that, it will enable us to come out of the present calamities also with many more good and sustainable jobs, and we will have been fulfilling the obligations to future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Mogens Lykketoft, former President of the United Nations General Assembly, who gave us also a picture of what happened 5 years ago and what should happen from now on. And to maintain this introduction, let's say at the global level, it's my pleasure to give the floor to Navi Pillay. Navi Pillay is not a European citizen, of course, so she cannot formally sign in the proposal on stopglobalwarming.eu. For those who are European citizens, is a reason more to do it also on her behalf in a way. But she is very much committed in this goal, and she was, as I said before, United Nations Commissioner for Human Rights, and President Sassoli already linked the issue of human rights to the issue of climate change, but also for this, Navi Pillay, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco, and thank you for having me. And you have my signature in spirit, actually. So as was already said, I was the High Commissioner for Human Rights during the years leading up to the preparation of two important instruments, the Development Agenda for 2030 and the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015. And so the Human Rights Office worked very hard to ensure that human rights are centralized and made integral to development and climate safeguards, that consultation with affected populations, especially indigenous and local communities, is prioritized, and that there be collective dialogue and action among governments, business, and civil society organizations. The Office of the High Commissioner published guidelines for local stakeholder consultations to ensure adequate public participation in climate change projects. Coming from South Africa, I am also particularly concerned with developing countries' challenges and how best the populations there can benefit and be included in this whole process. African populations are largely poverty-stricken from years of unbridled exploitation of their natural resources by multinational corporations. So we all welcome the Paris Climate Agreement. I agree that it marked a turning point for international climate action. For the very first time, all nations came together in the common cause of overcoming climate change. The Paris Agreement aims to keep global temperature rises to well below 2 degrees centigrade, above pre-industrial levels. Articles 6.1 and 6.2 of the agreement provide for enhanced cooperation among states to climate change mitigation, including through market-based approaches such as carbon pricing. Carbon pricing has been hailed by scientists and Nobel laureates as the most cost-effective and flexible way to achieve emission reduction. The promise of the Paris Agreement was that carbon pricing can promote sustainable development goals by channeling financing to sustainable development projects, generate revenues, which can be recycled into the green economy through government spending on research and developing into green technology, helping vulnerable communities adapt to the effects of climate change or managing the economic impacts of the transition to a low carbon economy. The promise of carbon pricing was also muted, so I'll unmute again. So the promise of carbon pricing was also that it will promote environmental health, economic and social benefits, ranging from public health benefits, emerging from reduced air pollution to green job creation. And I think that the European Citizen Initiative has an important role in connecting the dots so that civil society the world over will understand how these benefits will actually reach them. Carbon pricing is advancing rapidly as an incentive to climate action. By 2020, 25% of global emissions are expected to be under some carbon pricing mechanism. A significant number of non-annex countries under the UNFCCC are following carbon pricing. And, I don't want to list them all, but recently the V20, a group of 20 developing countries who are vulnerable to climate change, announced its intention to adopt carbon pricing by 2025. And of course, an increasing number of countries, I won't list them, have announced ambitious goals for carbon neutrality by setting net zero emission targets for 2050. So these are all very welcome signs. And a most encouraging step that other states may want to emulate is that China, currently responsible for 28% of the world's CO2 emissions, announced that it will reduce these emissions to net zero. This step alone is expected to reduce by 0.3% centigrade the projected global temperature. However, concerns remain over the uncertainty surrounding extraterritorial emissions. There is a need for domestic regulation of environmental impacts of overseas investments. And of course, we heard about the withdrawal by the US from the Paris Agreement for the past 4 years. So now we can welcome the indication given by President-elect Joe Biden that he will reconsider the US withdrawal. So these are all welcome steps. Scientists are warning us that humanity faces a climate emergency. Under the Paris Agreement for Climate Change, rich countries undertook to provide $100 million a year to help developing countries limit their own climate pollution and adapt to the heat waves, storms, and sea levels rises underway. The UN Secretary General warns that there will be irreversible impacts that would be absolutely devastating to the world economy and human life if carbon neutrality by 2050 is not acted on. The trillions of dollars, he says, now being invested to revive pandemic-battered economies must also be spent in a green way, or today's younger generations will inherit a wrecked planet, said the Secretary General. So 5 years after the adoption of the Paris Agreements, questions are being asked on whether carbon tax is indeed the most powerful way to combat climate change, or whether it is just an unnecessary cost factor, increasing price levels and bringing disadvantages in competing environments. Can the 2050 climate targets be feasibly realized without damage to the economy? So these are some of the questions I'm hearing, which I think we should apply our minds to. The EU active noted on December 1st, 2020, that the global average carbon price is currently only $2 a ton, far below what the planet needs. An IMF global study in 2019 states that the price should be $75 per ton by 2030 in order to have meaningful impact. The report acknowledges that such a price will drive up energy costs associated with fossil fuels, but it concludes nevertheless that the money could be used to cut other taxes and generate billions of new jobs if properly deployed. So that's a hopeful suggestion, then takes us into areas and areas of good governance, for instance. The promise of the creation of billions of jobs is offered as the incentive in the new development and climate mechanisms, and is understandably seen as a cruel illusion by starving unemployed populations on my continent. This is especially grotesque now in the face of the food and employment crisis brought on by COVID-19. I'm just seeing whether I've been cut off. Can you see?
No. You're not cut off, Navi.
Oh, I have. All right, I'll continue. Thank you. So I was talking about the promise of billions of jobs. This leads me to look at carbon pricing in developing countries. Civil society organizations, I consulted quite a few of them, such as Democracy Works Foundation in Johannesburg, are questioning the relevance of high levels of policy convergence language, the language itself around generic concepts. And they ask, how are these understood by indigenous and local communities? So a tendency towards technocratic solutions to climate change using technical quantifiable data, while important, neglects the cultural and place-specific experience of climate change impacts. Shifts towards decentralization have been driven by a new governance agenda that argues for increased autonomy of local authorities that are closer to the realities of local populations, allowing for increased participation of local actors, greater responsibilities to local realities, and more sustainable development agendas. Of course, it is accepted that market-based instruments such as carbon pricing are useful for financing the type of sustainable infrastructure development to drive inclusive economic growth and adaptation and mitigation in African states. But these do come with challenges. So if I look at my own country, well, firstly, no country in sub-Saharan Africa has put in place a price on carbon. The South African Treasury is putting in place a carbon tax at a proposed rate of 120 Rand ton CO2 emissions. That's about $6 or $7 US. They're putting that tax before up to 95% rebates will be allowed. Secondly, African countries often lack the institutional and legal frameworks to trade carbon, but alignment within regional development communities offers an opportunity to address this. Thirdly, Africa's share of the carbon markets remain relatively low despite its relatively high renewable energy potential. 261 clean development mechanism projects are from Africa. Fourthly, African countries have generally stuck to compliance with markets linked to the Kyoto Protocol, CDMs, joint implementation, and the emission trading systems. However, less than 1% of the voluntary carbon finance has come to Africa. A report prepared in 2019 by Worldwide Fund for Nature, South Africa, noted, I quote, "The global carbon market has failed to account for all the external costs of carbon emissions and has therefore failed to deliver economic efficiency and sustainable behavior." The report concluded that in South Africa, compliance and voluntary carbon credit trading present challenges. The state fuel body, Eskom, and non-renewable energy provisions are responsible for the bulk of South Africa's emissions. This will create a relatively small market for carbon credits outside the energy sector at current rates of 120 Rand a ton. Civil society leadership is needed to facilitate participation around the prioritization of development outcomes and investment areas, such as small-scale incremental projects for pooled carbon credit trading. The South African government's National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy was made public recently on 18th August 2020. The Minister of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries, Barbara Creecy, confirmed the country's commitment to the Paris Agreement and to their aim to reduce vulnerability of society, the environment, and the economy to the effect of climate change. The strategy gives effect to the national plan's vision of creating, I quote, "a low-carbon, climate-resilient economy and a just society." The minister stressed that adaptation remains a critical important area for developing countries, and she hoped that there will be a higher commitment at COP26 in 2021 for all the elements of the Paris Agreement, that is mitigation, adaptation, and means of implementation. The minister noted that to achieve this, they will require additional, predictable, and adequate financing, technology, and capacity building for mitigation as well as adaptation support, including securing carbon market share of proceeds. This, she said, will enable the country to ensure that food production is not threatened, infrastructure is resilient, and sustainable economic development ensures. So there we are, many challenges in poor countries, disadvantaged countries, but all committed to the Paris Climate Agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Navi Pillay, former UN Commissioner for Human Rights, for this comprehensive intervention, not only on climate change, but also on the specific proposal of carbon pricing. So, repeating the invitation to sign on stopglobalwarming.eu, I also repeat the information that you can follow in English and in Italian and share through your social media channel. Per la diretta in italiano, i canali sono quelli di YouTube dell'associazione.
So you can go on the YouTube channels of the Luca Coscioni Association and the Facebook page of Marco Cappato. Now it is my pleasure to hand over to Emma Bonino, Italian Senator for Più Europa. She is a former EU Commissioner. You have the floor, Emma. Your mic is off.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much, everybody, and the previous speaker. So I will not repeat, evidently, what is already been said. It's a sort of this kind of forum, a little bit preaching to the converted people. And I hope that going public on the social, etc., we will manage to convince people who are not convinced yet, in order to strengthen our network or your network and awareness. Now, of course, it will not be easy, but for instance, the agreement yesterday night at the European Council of Head of States, it seems to me another step forward, moved to 55%, if I am correctly, in 2030. The threshold, but please remind that it's not so difficult to write numbers. The difficulty is to implement them. And if we look backward in the past 5 years, as Morgan said, not much has been done. For many reasons, the exit of the US under Trump leadership, who has been a signal to many countries and other government, and now there is the alibi of the COVID. So we have other priority. We will look at this issue later on, which nobody knows what means really. Or in my country, there is another risk that the financial envelope that is coming from Europe will be used in sort of a methodology that my country has known already in the 80s, which is nationalizing almost everything, which is not very effective, neither for jobs nor for economic growth and progress. But my final reflection, and I think that the agreement yesterday night was not so bad. It has been reached with a sort of consensus. We all know the story, so I will not repeat. But let me also tell that there is a reference to gas that I would suggest you look attentively to this dossier of gas, etc., etc. But from a political point of view, it's very, very important, not only the government commitment or declarations, but the consensus of people. That's why I attach an enormous importance to the European Citizens Initiative. I don't know at what point of signature you stand. It's from past experience on other issue, more or less. It's not been very successful. I hope you have more chance. As Marco said, that you're a network of 160 NGOs in 35 countries. So I will really push everybody to support and sign this initiative, because we need both. We need citizens and government. Government will never go against consensus. This is from experience, by the way. So they are more encouraged to move if they feel that they have a consensus in the country among citizens on the different aspect of the issue, that of course it's not provide only everything positive. There will be challenge, like Navi told us. So that it needs also courage from the politicians and the government to go forward, addressing the difficulties and problems that Navi has so well explained, referring to her country, but it could be referred to many countries. So the popular support is, first of all, the only tool we have as citizens to push the government, to let them know that we agree, even if there are problems. we agree to final goal, and we stand ready to see the transition step needed to reach there. And Navi, I'm just going a little bit, for instance, in Europe, the agreement reached yesterday is not so bad on environment, is not also very bad on next generation EU, but to reach an agreement, any request of rule of law, human and political rights in Poland and Hungary has been postponed by 2 years. Which means exactly the period in which new election in Hungary will take place. So we must be clear, and we cannot possibly reach everything, but I'm not very happy that in order for Hungary and Poland to overcome the economic crisis due partly, I repeat, partly to the COVID situation, 2 years of a moratorium has been allowed to this country to be back on track on the liberal democracy pillars and civil rights. But that is the agreement. So we have to take advantage of this agreement, let's say, to let our voices heard. And I really, again, and I stop here, have to have citizen voices publicly demanding these steps so that government feel a little bit more courageous. And they don't think that if they move forward on environment or carbon tax or carbon prices better, they will lose consensus. We have to insert ourselves in this sort of possible gap who will be created by the government decision. I don't even talk implementation, but let's say at least a decision and public consensus. So I plead for an alliance of governments and citizens to move forward in this field. Thank you very much. Please sign the Stop Global Warming.eu European Citizen Initiative.
Grazie. Thank you very much. Grazie, Emma. Thank you very much to Emma Bonino. And Emma was asking, how is the situation with the signature? We are very, very far from the goal because we are around 50,000 citizens. The European Commission is about to decide if to postpone again the deadline because we cannot go in the street collecting signature. And this is a big obstacle, of course. Emma Bonino talked about government and citizens. Well, there is a natural institutional bridge between government and citizens. This is parliament. These are parliaments. And now, thanks to Yannick Jadot, we can go to the European Parliament, not only because Yannick is a member of the European Parliament from the Green Group, but also because he's a rapporteur of one of the elements which is included in our European Citizen Initiative, the mechanism of carbon border adjustment. Yannick can explain in a very simple way what it is about. And I have also a question for you. If Yannick, is a question from the stopglobalwarming.eu promoter committee, if you think that the proposal of this European carbon pricing could become also a parliamentary initiative, because with the difficulty of collecting signature, maybe to have a cross-party initiative within the European Parliament. Eleonora Evi will speak soon in our conference, could be a way to achieve the result. Yannick, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marco, and thank you, Monica Frassoni, for your invitation. It was very interesting, and I tried to make it short so that there might be some question and debate. Clearly, the carbon price is at the core of any climate policy. It's not easy. Clearly, you know, I'm coming from France. You know, there was a huge movement which was called les Gilets jaunes, which was putting at stake that, you know, any carbon price policy should be clearly accompanied with a strong social policy. I mean, any kind of initiative about, you know, carbon taxation should be strongly just socially speaking. And this is where it works, meaning the Nordic countries. It has always been some strong social compensation. So people are part of the policy. The carbon price remains a strong political signal for the industry, for changing behaviors, investment and strategies, but it has to be socially just, because otherwise we are ending against the wall. I mean, clearly, it's a huge point we need to take into account. But of course, the carbon price is not the only tool when it comes to climate policy. I mean, regulation, public investment, targets, all these things are very, very important. Of course, 5 years after the Paris Agreement, I mean, the EU is moving forward. Science say that we should go up to 70% reduction by 2030. The Parliament adopted, and Sassoli recalled it, a 60% target for 2030. The Council is at least minus 55. What is interesting also for the role of the Parliament, it's now will be negotiating this target within the co-decision, within a climate law, and it's not only the governments to decide. This is an important thing also for mobilizing people around this very important objective. So they are very positive mood. The Fridays for Future, more and more, you know, if you look at the international situation, you know, 6 years ago, for the new electric capacity, it was 50-50. 50 renewables, 50 non-renewables. Now, worldwide, it's 75 for renewables, meaning that the private sector, meaning that the researchers, meaning that the companies, meaning that the local authorities, meaning that the citizens are clearly taken the energy transition in their daily life or in their strategic investment. So all these things are very positive, but at the same time, we know that what is happening right now might be a very strong obstacle to climate protection. If you look at the 12 trillion dollars put in the recovery plans, most of them are not climate friendly. If you look at the recovery money going to the energy sector, more than half of this money is going to fossil fuel, meaning that what you are fighting for in terms of a very effective carbon price, it's key in the battle we are trying to run. So coming back to the carbon border adjustment, this is very important, because since EU will do much more for climate, we need to avoid any disloyal competition, any dumping. Within the EU, with, of course, the trade partners. And first, CBA, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, it's very important because that means that as EU, we move from emissions on the continent to our footprint. And we know that we have reduced our emissions within EU, but we are increasing the emissions we are importing. Now it's about 20% of our emissions. So it's very important that our climate policy covers our climate footprint, our CO2 footprint, and not only what we are emitting on European soil. This is the first point. Second point, if we want to make sure that we can improve all our regulations about climate, it's key, especially in this economical and social context, that we protect our industry. Decarbonization cannot mean desindustrialization. Otherwise, we will lose the people support, as Emma was talking about. And maybe more than that, through this carbon adjustment, we could also bring back some industry on the European soil to make sure that, we develop a low carbon industry. And we know that somehow it is our future to have this low carbon industry. So CBA, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, is about, covering our footprint. It's about protecting our industry. And it's about, of course, pushing our trade partners to do better. And somehow what is going on in the US, and Marco, you were referring to the US, might be very interesting. We do not really know what Biden is willing to do with carbon adjustment. He mentioned it in his campaign, but it's not totally clear. Let's be frank. But if EU is at the forefront on this mechanism, if the US is ready to have, not a European type carbon market or carbon price or CBM, but somehow similar, that means that what happened in Copenhagen for the worst, alliance between the US and the BRICS, what happened for Paris, alliance between Obama and China, and somehow an alliance between Europe and China. We need now in this international negotiation to have also EU with US, pushing for a tough agenda. But the negotiation we are having now in the parliament on CBA are not that easy. The positive point is nobody is challenging the need for such an instrument. The question in the parliament and in the EU is not whether we need a CBAM or not, it's what CBAM we need. That's the positive thing. But as you know, the ETS system in the EU has not been as efficient as we would like. And there is a strong report from the Court of Auditors saying that sometimes it has to be totally ineffective in delivering the objective. And we know that there are too many free allowances for cement, steel, chemical industry, and some others, so that it's not effective enough. So the battle within the European Parliament is, of course, to protect our industry. But it's about, the phase out of the free allowances system, the ETS system. So it's much stronger, much more ambitious, and we make sure that CBM is substituting the free allowances system so that we protect our industry, not reducing the necessary ambition for our industry. So this is the whole issue about CBM. And I will mention a last thing. Let's not forget, and it was mentioned, let's not forget about international solidarity regarding climate and development. We are facing an incredible situation where, trillions of dollars are being spent in recovery, and so little, you know, for helping developing countries. And CBM revenues should also be used as the ETS and other instruments to help developing countries and the most vulnerable of them to do this climate adaptation and develop a new type of development. So we have a great perspective for you. CBN, EU will play its credibility on climate, meaning having the link between climate, social, and industry. And CBN might be one of those tools helping to have EU back in European citizens' heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Yannick Jadot, for having enlightened such an important tool that can be and should be activated to reach the goals of reducing and then stopping CO2 emissions. I invite the audience in the different social media channels to raise questions if you have. I saw from my Facebook Kolstar Wacken talking about the role of hemp, which would lead us the hemp as an ecological tool and plant, which would lead us to as a bridge to a different political campaign that many of us are sharing. So I thank him for his suggestions. I remind that the debate in English is going on the public pages on Facebook on stopglobalwarming.eu and Humans, and in Italian from the YouTube channel of Associazione Luca Coscioni and Facebook of Marco Cappato. We are about to close this first round on the international picture, not because the second part will not be also international, but we will have mainly Italian speakers. So I ask to Emma, Navi, Mogens, and Yannick, if you have very short remark or reactions to or question on what have been said. If not, of course, I thank you, all of you, because this webinar was not mentioned just to be an occasion of discussion or just to be an occasion of celebration. From your speech came out very, very clear how difficult is the way ahead. So we don't have a victory on our shoulder that we can just celebrate and claim. There is much, much work to do. I asked Monica Frassoni, who is a co-promoter of stopglobalwarming.eu, if she can raise a comment and a question for this first round, and then we move to the second part. Monica Frassoni, who is also president of European Alliance to Save Energy. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I must admit that I really like this global view, even if you are talking about a European initiative. And I would like to understand, above all from Yannick, but also from Emma, if there is a way in the national and the European Parliament to promote this kind of initiative. In the European Parliament, there is a thing called indirect legislative initiative that can be promoted through a resolution which should be adopted by a majority, by a qualified majority. And we were thinking that this could be a good instrument also to sensibilize and also to reach the goal of making the Commission act, above all in this moment. And we were thinking that the combination of the discussion on the report, which is an initiative report from Yannick, could be interesting, at least to a way to be explored. But I don't know what you think about it, Yannick. And Emma, I don't know if in the Italian Senate and generally in the Italian Parliament, this is something that could be pursued. And also Mr. Lickenthoff, probably in Denmark, we have already some contact with some members of parliament in order to push this. Above all, if we are going to have the prolongation of the timing of this question. of this initiative. Thank you very much.
Monica. Thank you, Monica. Quick reaction from the speakers. The Parliament margin of maneuvers. I don't know who wants to start the first.
No, I can say just 2 words. If you would be or spend half an hour in the chamber of the deputy or in the Senate, you will realize that for the moment there is no room for such an initiative. I talked to many colleagues, and the interest is less than 0. Everybody seems focused on Christmas. Can we join the family people, or can we not join the family people? At political level is more fragile than ever. But that doesn't mean that we should stop. Let me tell you that this signature, even if it can be done by through digital means, it's not so easy because people to sign has to see something, and we cannot go into the street. So we use the social to push people to sign, but let me tell you also from past experience that is not so effective. So keep calm, keep resistant and resilient. Don't expect, let's say, quickly some move, at least in the Italian parliament, believe me.
Grazie, Emma. Yannick, more hope in the European Parliament?
You know, the way we write reports in the European Parliament, you know, it's not always very popular, simple and understandable for a European citizen. But I would like to read the Article 10 of my report. The carbon pricing under CBAM should mirror the dynamic evolution of the price of the union allowances under the ETS system, meaning that if we want a strong CBAM, it has also to fit and to align itself on the ETS system. But more important, what I put in my report, and which is currently discussed, is that points out that the introduction of a rising carbon floor price under the EU ETS could ensure predictability under the CBAM, while also ensuring a stronger price signal within the EU. So meaning that what we are talking about, it's in my report. Whether it will pass the vote and the obvious political compromise we need, it's not sure. But you know that with this new climate objective for 2030, and you mentioned it, Marco, next year will be the year about reforming the ETS system. So the old debate about, you know, the allowances, but also what should be a carbon floor price, I think it's part of the discussion. So we need to get support about this idea to make sure that, you know, we will have a market, but ensuring a carbon price, a minimum carbon price, so that we don't fall in the kind of hole we have been in for the last years with a so low carbon price that it doesn't change anything. Thank you.
Grazie, Yannick. Mogens Lykketoft, can we count on some Danish initiative?
Well, I don't know, actually. I'm personally out of national parliament nowadays, but what I see is the perspective from the decision in the European Council this week is that the courage of each and every national parliament will hopefully be raising because of the UN, of the European Union presenting a bottom of ambitions for each and every country. And I think there's necessary now in the coming years a very strong interaction between the European Parliament and national parliaments in order to inspire each other to act and inspire each other on the efficiency on the different tools we decide on. I can mention that from the viewpoint of Denmark, well, 55% reductions in 2030 is very good on European level. Our own ambition is already a 70% reduction in Denmark. And of course, it will be much easier to do that if Europe actually reaches the 55%.
Grazie Mogens. Ciao Emma. And Navi Pillay, you have a final comment on? Okay. Thank you to all of you, to all the speakers of this first part, and we are getting into also national comment with what Mogens just said and what Emma Bonino said about the Italian Parliament. So I would ask to Flavia Pansieri, a former Deputy High Commissioner on Human Rights, to help us in making a bridge from global, European, and also national politics. And as I said before, next speakers will be Carlo Corazza, the head of the Italian office of the European Parliament, Eleonora Evi, member of the European Parliament, and Monica Frossoni will close our debate. So thanks to all of course, if you want to stay, you are more than welcome, but thank you very much for your speech and intervention, and we will work together on these issues. Merci beaucoup. Ciao, thanks. Flavia Pansieri.
Grazie, Marco. Thank you very much. Let me continue in English, even if the speakers are Italian for this last session, because I realized with a tinge of terror that I'd never done such a thing in Italian in my life. I've done it in many other languages, but not Italian. So let's keep English, and this will make it more accessible also for all the, I hope, many listeners and viewers that we have from beyond the Italian border. Let me start by thanking you for this invitation and this opportunity. I've been very pleased to listen to the speakers before for one very specific reason. 2020 has been this disastrous pandemic year, and understandably, perhaps legitimately too, governments, local administrations, civil society groups, individuals have all been concerned about how do we deal with this pandemic. It's an immediate urgency that has to be addressed. But at the same time, and as the saying goes, this crisis is too big a crisis to be wasted. And it's important to look not just at the problems as we face them now, but also at the opportunities that this crisis is opening. And I think if we look positively, not with a pink tinted glasses, but realistically at the current situation, despite all the challenges, which are enormous, are indeed opportunities. The first one, and that's why it's good that we celebrate 5 years after the signing of the Paris Agreement, is that there is a broader recognition that we must come to grips with climate change. Climate change deniers are becoming increasingly irrelevant. The choices to be made to address the issue are very difficult, but at the same time, there is a recognition that this is the moment to move. And if we think in recovery terms, as we are collectively, it's important to really intentionally focus on how do we build back better. And building back better means making big changes at the individual, local, national, and multinational level. I'd like, before I give the floor to my speakers, to mention just 2 points which open up the possibility of looking at how to do it better in a way that it protects climate. The first one is the energy sector, and I'm thinking airlines. airlines which are big polluters, it's important to recognize that there will be a need to support them because they're facing this very challenging moment. But is it possible to think about the ways to support them, to help them bridge this moment with incentives to encourage them to introduce carbon saving, CO2 emission reduction elements? Stop global warming. Yes, absolutely. It's the first way to go, and I fully support this initiative. And I will be going and taking a picture with, as you've done, Marco, in front of the Duomo di Orvieto, and then figure out if I can how to post it. But it's also important to look at ways to induce and maybe force a little bit big polluters, not just by introducing carbon pricing, but also encouraging, facilitating, supporting research to introduce emission reduction technologies and developments. The other one, which is never talked about because it's a bit of a sacred cow, and it is a sacred cow figuratively, but also literally, is the common agricultural policy. We know that agriculture is also a big emitter. So again, there too, there is room to look at how can we support, especially the small producers that have been affected in a way that allows them to reduce their emissions and introduce technologies that are more environmentally friendly. And in that respect, I think it's important to recognize how much there is a role, not just for governments, and obviously also citizens' initiatives like Stop Global Warming, but also the middle level of the public administrations. We've had many good examples going from California in the US, sticking to the Paris Agreement, even if the US itself was not, to cities like Dublin, Palermo, and others that have signed on to stop global warming from at their level. And so I think the partnership between the governments and the communities, the individuals that Emma, for instance, was talking about, is important by also bringing in this intermediate level that often makes it easier to reach the individual citizens than from a national government. So from that point of view, I think it is really essential that as we focus our discussion in this next session, and here I will stop, we think concretely, what is it that can be done that promotes the goals of Stop Global Warming in terms of introducing carbon pricing, but also in terms of promoting scientific research and technological development that makes it possible to continue to maintain a steady level of industrialization. As was said, we are not that, but also introducing measures that reduce the impact on the environment. So let me now, I'll stop talking, and I would like to introduce Carlo Corazza, who has a long experience within the European Commission by having worked on technical cooperation programs to develop the legislative harmonization in Eastern and Central Europe, and is now the director in Milano of the European Representation Office. So Carlo, you have the floor.
Grazie mille. Ho avuto anche l'onore e il piacere di lavorare con Emma.
Thank you very much. I also had the honor to work with Emma Bonino. I'm very proud of that. Thank you very much to Marco Cappato, Monica Frassoni for this initiative that my office supports and is very convinced to support it. I think it's a good opportunity to use an anniversary to try and push some proposals forward As President Sassoli mentioned, the European Parliament will definitely push towards more ambitious targets. In October, the large majority of the Parliament asked for a 60% reduction in emissions by 2030. The Parliament has also requested to set an intermediate target for 2040, and I think that the Parliament will be the institution in the world that will push more for these targets. And I think it's a realistic position, because understanding that we have to stop climate change is being realistic. So I don't think we have to talk about unrealistic targets. I believe that after the agreement achieved yesterday about next generation EU and targets, I think we are at a turning point, especially because there is an inextricable link between the recovery plan to try and get out of this pandemic and sustainability. And this link can also be seen in figures. 37% of the Next Generation EU investment will go to new technologies and to sustainability, and 40% of the agricultural expenditure will have to be invested in sustainable technologies. 1/3 of the research funds, 95 billion euros, and over 30% of the European Investment Plan, Invest EU, will go in the same direction. And the investment of the European investment banks will have to go 50% to sustainable projects. So there's a channeling of public investment in sustainable projects. Obviously, this is a project that has to be also accepted by all the industrial partners and civil society and social partners. There's also the need to create jobs, to strengthen European competitiveness through a technological leadership that may help us regain our leading role that we have had in the past in digital technologies, for instance, because for very many green technologies there is a possibility to become leaders. I'm not sure whether we're really close to those 260 billion euros investment to combat climate change, but it's the first time since I've been working for the EU that there is a robust investment plan that touches all the important sectors: energy production, transportation, building industry, agriculture, infrastructure. So it's a very, very complex and convincing strategy. It's a real strategy. Let's think about the construction industry. We already have good rules and good technologies. 80% of Italian buildings were built before the 90s, so with very low energy standards. Obviously, investment to speed up the restoration of buildings with limited cost and creating jobs can help achieve the targets that were set for 2030 and 2050. Now, about transportation, that's a bit more complex because we still haven't got all the technologies, but it's a good that could be a good stimulus to invest. We have to think about the heavy hauling, shipment by sea and so on, and then energy production. There's a lot to invest in new technology, but renewable energy is competitive now compared to fossil fuels. I believe that the key is to increase the price of carbon. This is really in line with the stance taken by the European Parliament. This must be counteracted, though, with two different things. First of all, the social consequences. We'll have to avoid that carbon pricing may damage job creation. And on the other hand, the Green Deal diplomacy is important. A central point in our strategy is the carbon border adjustment mechanism, because if our strategy about climate is transformed into a deindustrialization, which will make us lose also in terms of new technologies, and it would lead industry in China and in other countries to keep using coal, that would be a disaster. So it's very important to combat environmental dumping, and this mechanism of adjustment at the border is really important, because together with the ETS, it can, together with the plastic tax, it can generate resources that can then fuel the 30-year loan of the Next Generation EU. So the 5 pillars that support the strategy: investment, target, legal framework, creation of a strong domestic market. Well, the 5th, the diplomacy of the Green Deal, according to me, is the most crucial one. We can no longer close commercial agreements outside the Paris Agreement. We are the first donor with 40% of aid, and aid has to be linked to actions to combat climate change. All our economic diplomacy must push the rest of the world to move in the same direction as Europe, because this is a fight that we can only win all together. Europe alone cannot win it. Thank you very much, and I'm going to follow the debate with great interest. Thank you very much for your very precise remarks. And thank you very much for providing us all the figures about a European commitment that hopefully will allow Europe to really play a driving and a leading role internationally to combat climate change, to fight climate change, and to help our species to survive in terms of economic and social sustainability. I would like now to give the floor to Eleonora Evi, who is a European Member of Parliament since 2014, and I'd like to ask her, as an MEP, to tell us what the European Union can do in order to take up this leading role and to be sort of the driver, the main driver in terms of fight against climate change, including the Stop Global Warming EU initiative.
Grazie molto e buongiorno a tutti. Io intanto rispondo subito a questa domanda diretta dicendo che l'Unione deve fare ancora moltissimo e ha molto spazio di manovra dal mio punto di vista. Dico questo perché oggi stiamo celebrando l'anniversario dell'accordo di Parigi e ieri, appunto, come è stato già ricordato da diversi relatori, i governi degli Stati membri si sono messi d'accordo per il taglio al 2030 del 55, di almeno il 55% di emissioni. Questo è stato salutato da molte parti come un passo in avanti, un qualcosa di positivo. Io voglio mettere un attimo voglio fare delle precisazioni, perché sono convinta anch'io che si tratti sicuramente di un passo in avanti rispetto a quelli che erano gli impegni precedenti al 2030, quindi di un taglio del 40%, quindi è indubbio che si sta aumentando questa percentuale, ma questa era già la proposta della Commissione europea. Gli Stati membri in realtà giocano un pochino con i numeri. Perché dico questo? Perché questo taglio del 55% è un taglio netto netto di emissioni, che va a considerare anche quelli che saranno gli assorbimenti da parte, ad esempio, dei terreni, in una maniera del tutto ancora oggi poco chiara. Quindi si va di fatto a minare l'efficacia del target, e la stessa Commissione europea nelle sue valutazioni ha calcolato che una riduzione del 55% netto significherebbe, considerando le emissioni negative appunto sottratte dall'atmosfera, di un target effettivo del 50,5. Quindi capite bene che già stiamo riducendo la portata dell'ambizione. Inoltre, e questa è una cosa secondo me molto importante, il target dovrebbe essere raggiunto da tutti i singoli paesi dell'Unione Europea, da tutti gli Stati membri. Invece si sta parlando di un target europeo, e quindi che verrà raggiunto in maniera complessiva dall'Unione Europea, e anche questo mina un po' le fondamenta, l'ambizione di questo target, ed è il motivo per cui infatti il Parlamento europeo, spero, manterrà una posizione ferrea durante i negoziati con i governi, come è stato ricordato bene prima dal Presidente Sassoli, da Jadot e da altri relatori. Noi chiediamo un 60% di taglio di riduzioni di emissioni. Io so che anche la relatrice del Parlamento europeo, che è una persona molto determinata, Jutta Guteland, socialista, farà un grande lavoro per non indietreggiare rispetto appunto al punto di caduta che dovrà essere trovato tra i due colegislatori, quindi tra il Parlamento e il Consiglio. Questo insomma per settare un po' la scena, quindi per dire un po' dove siamo e quanto c'è ancora bisogno di migliorarsi, dal momento che comunque è necessario e sarà necessario rivedere tutta la normativa europea in campo di politica climatica. È stato citato più e più volte il sistema ETS, che sappiamo è uno dei pilastri della politica climatica dell'Unione Europea, che si riferisce però soprattutto al settore industriale, quindi a quei processi produttivi interni all'Unione Europea, e molte saranno le sfide per aumentare l'ambizione di questo particolare strumento legislativo, ma molti altri se ne devono affiancare, ed è qui che mi voglio concentrare, perché la proposta di introdurre un carbon pricing deve essere la strada da portare avanti. È una strada assolutamente auspicabile, che peraltro appunto sostenuta da autorevolissime persone, da tantissimi cittadini. Io sostengo fortemente questa iniziativa, l'iniziativa dei cittadini europei, che consente appunto ai cittadini di chiedere all'Unione Europea, alla Commissione europea, di introdurre una legislazione dedicata. Io credo che sia necessario, perché ad oggi abbiamo visto che il sistema di prezzo di carbonio interno all'Unione Europea, che fa riferimento prevalentemente, come vi dicevo prima, all'ETS, spero che mi sentiate, perché in effetti forse non ho una connessione molto buona. Ok, allora proseguo. Stavo dicendo, il prezzo di carbonio che è stato garantito in base alla direttiva ETS, quindi allo scambio di quote sul mercato all'interno dell'Unione Europea, si è rivelato nel corso del tempo sempre troppo basso per stimolare un vero cambiamento nei settori produttivi, e quindi per stimolare le industrie europee a fare quegli investimenti, invece che pagare i permessi di emissione, e quindi invece di continuare ad emettere CO2 in atmosfera, che hanno un costo, questo costo sempre troppo basso, questo prezzo sempre troppo basso, per invogliarli a fare quegli investimenti e trasformare le loro produzioni per diventare finalmente più pulite. Questo è evidente che non ha funzionato, è stato ricordato anche dal collega Jadot, ma è altrettanto evidente che questo sistema, il sistema che si basa sullo scambio di quote sul mercato, è un qualche cosa presente nell'accordo di Parigi, quindi nasce con l'accordo di Parigi, ed è evidente che fino a che non non ci sarà un sistema globale, internazionale di scambio di quote e quindi di un prezzo della CO2, è necessario che a livello europeo si facciano dei passi avanti e si possa andare ad affiancare altri strumenti e per quello che come dicevo prima l'ICE Stop Global Warming
why the European Citizens Initiative Stop Global Warming is there's no sound. The speaker was cut off. The sound of the speaker was cut off.
Sì.
If you can please,
Stavo dicendo che in Parlamento europeo quali sono gli strumenti? Gli strumenti, come sapete, legislativi sono in capo alla Commissione europea, che è colei che detiene l'iniziativa legislativa, ma in realtà, in base ai trattati, l'articolo 225 del trattato consente anche al Parlamento di fare delle proposte. Ed ecco che qui, con quella che si chiama strumento di iniziativa legislativa del Parlamento europeo, il Parlamento può cercare di far sentire la propria voce e l'obiettivo e la sfida, perché sicuramente è qualcosa di non così immediato e semplice da realizzare, costruire all'interno dello stesso Parlamento europeo quella consapevolezza e impegno nel portare avanti la ICE Stop Global Warming anche con gli strumenti legislativi del Parlamento europeo. Questo è un qualche cosa su cui nel corso di queste ultime settimane si è tentato, con anche il sostegno di alcuni altri deputati, in particolare con Jadot, e stiamo cercando di costruire questo fronte per depositare appunto un'iniziativa legislativa che possa tradurre la ICE Stop Global Warming in una proposta appunto del Parlamento europeo. Ma ci tengo a dire altre due cose che secondo me sono molto importanti. Io credo che non ci si debba concentrare solo ed esclusivamente su quelli che sono gli strumenti che vanno ad intervenire sull'Unione Europea, sulle emissioni dirette dell'Unione Europea. Perché dico questo? Perché, come bene sapete, l'Unione Europea è anche un mercato di consumatori e sono i nostri consumi che a livello globale hanno un impatto davvero importante e che deve essere preso in considerazione. Ne ha fatto riferimento in effetti anche prima il collega Jadot, parlando di footprint e quindi di impronta di carbonio dei nostri consumi come cittadini europei, ed ecco perché io dico tutti i nuovi strumenti e tutte le nuove proposte che verranno fatte da qui in avanti dovranno avere al centro non soltanto l'attenzione sulle emissioni dirette legate ad esempio appunto alla produzione in Europa, ma anche quello che è l'impatto legato ai consumi. In che modo? Ci sono diversi modi che si possono mettere in campo. Io ritengo che andare ad intervenire ad esempio con una IVA verde e quindi con una imposta sulle emissioni incorporate dei prodotti, che non importa che siano stati realizzati in Europa o altrove, ma sono le emissioni che quel preciso prodotto ha generato nel suo ciclo di vita e che noi europei stiamo però consumando ed acquistando. Noi europei dobbiamo avere la possibilità di sapere il contenuto di carbonio di ogni singolo prodotto in modo tale che possa essere differenziato, ad esempio appunto con un'IVA differenziata in base al contenuto di carbonio e consentire ai cittadini di essere consapevoli rispetto ai propri acquisti e quindi avere la possibilità di scegliere sul mercato qualcosa che è più pulito o che magari ha inquinato di più. È evidente che in tutta questa considerazione l'attenzione sul risvolto sociale deve essere sempre garantita e quindi come si diceva benissimo all'inizio la transizione ecologica non può prescindere da un'attenzione altissima rispetto a non creare, anzi ridurre le disuguaglianze sociali. Questo è fondamentale, altrimenti stiamo assolutamente andando nella direzione sbagliata. Però ecco, io credo che non possiamo più permetterci di non parlare di fiscalità ambientale e quindi di dare anche strumenti ai cittadini per poter acquistare in maniera consapevole e eventualmente scegliere prodotti più puliti o meno puliti, anche perché, e questo andrebbe tutto a beneficio delle nostre imprese europee, in particolare le nostre imprese italiane, che sono molto più pulite rispetto a quelle del resto del mondo, quindi andando anche a dare una grande iniezione di fiducia rispetto appunto anche alla competitività anche sulla scala globale e a consentire appunto di essere, diciamo, in qualche misura e scelte in via preferenziale da parte dei cittadini europei. E un'ultima considerazione, poi davvero chiudo, che è più un avvertimento e un'allerta rispetto a ciò che sta accadendo, perché io temo molto che in tutti gli strumenti che stiamo mettendo in campo per fronteggiare la crisi climatica, sia quelli regolatori che quelli soprattutto legati a quelli finanziari, quindi sia il prossimo bilancio dell'Unione Europea che il Recovery Fund, quindi il Next Generation EU, se noi consentiamo escamotage contabili o scorciatoie come quella di prendere la CO2, metterla sottoterra, quindi nascondere la polvere sotto il tappeto con progetti come il Carbon Capture and Storage, quindi appunto progetti che mantengono di fatto il business as usual, quindi la situazione attuale inalterata, perché consentono semplicemente di catturare la CO2 e metterla sottoterra. Questo evidentemente drenerà risorse finanziarie importantissime a altre priorità che sono l'efficienza energetica e le rinnovabili, che sono le vere strade da perseguire per trasformare concretamente la nostra società ed avviarci davvero verso una neutralità climatica al 2050. Se rischiamo di appunto portare avanti questo tipo di escamotage, non facciamo un buon servizio ai nostri cittadini e non riusciremo a centrare gli obiettivi che ci stiamo dando. E quindi per escamotage e trappole io mi riferisco ovviamente a questo del CCS, ma anche ai grandi investimenti sul gas e sull'idrogeno blu, e quindi quelle fonti energetiche che sono ancora legate in qualche misura alle fonti fossili. Questo purtroppo è un rischio che noi dobbiamo scongiurare e io mi auguro che anche dal Parlamento europeo si possano levare delle voci forti in modo tale da garantire che ciò non accada. Chiudo semplicemente facendo un altro invito, perché anche io voglio invitare quanti più cittadini possibili a sostenere la ICE Stop Global Warming. Penso che sia appunto fondamentale che i cittadini facciano sentire la propria voce e mi auguro anche io fortemente che il periodo di raccolta firme possa essere esteso, perché obiettivamente è sotto gli occhi di tutti in questo momento così complicato anche la partecipazione e quindi gli strumenti democratici vengono e sono sacrificati a causa della pandemia, e quindi mi auguro che si potrà continuare a raccogliere firme e raggiungere il milione necessario per portare questa iniziativa all'interno delle istituzioni europee.
Grazie.
The important role that we have in checking the way we consume, what models of consumption are we representing, and underlining the fact that there's something that we can do in addition to signing on to the Citizen Initiative by looking at the way we in our daily life manage the what role we play in terms of protecting or not our climate. For the conclusions, I would like now to pass the floor to Monica Frassoni, who has been a European member of Parliament and is now the president of the European Alliance for Energy, which she co-founded, as well as a member of the Council of the Friends of Europe. So, Monica, the floor is yours to wrap this all up.
Thank you very much. Mille grazie. So I would like to thank everyone for their presence and also for the quality of the intervention. I thought that it was really quite interesting what we heard. First, the global dimension, and then also the element of contribution that this initiative can give for the fight to climate change, that is by definition a global fight. Io credo che il problemi che la questione che noi dobbiamo adesso costruire.
Now I think that we have to work on a twofold issue after listening to these very interesting contributions. First of all, we have to persist and use awareness raising instruments, taking us to overcome the 50,000 signatures collected so far. We got to reach other countries, and this is irrespective of us reaching 1 million signature. And humans, Virginia and Marco and others, have really worked on networking to pool associations and individuals who are interested in this campaign. So this networking work was and is fundamental. Of course, reaching our target in terms of signature is essential, but also awareness raising is essential. I mean, pushing the idea of a supranational tax, carbon tax that is fair is extremely important. And this initiative should go hand in hand with the European Parliament's initiative. I'm very grateful to Eleonora Evi for what she said, and Yannick and his colleague who have been working with Alberto Maiocchi for the European Parliament initiative 1 year ago. Can go on working with Eleonora's group in order to support this proposal. We also have to take advantage of Yannick's report, Yannick Jadot's report on the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And Yannick also said that the issue of carbon pricing should be further clarified. And this is something we should work upon through amendments and through a group of parliament members that can work on this. I mean, there's a number of initiatives that will keep us busy in the next few months that will be essential to prepare the COP meeting in Glasgow and also to review all the European energy legislation. So we're talking about renewables, energy efficiency, taxation, CO2 emissions from vehicles. So we know that this is a political struggle that is not easy because pro-environmental forces are not always winning. But this battle, I think, can really be supported by the European Parliament. As Emma said earlier, consensus is key. When national and European members of parliament realize that this initiative is supported by people, by individuals, while their work will be, of course, encouraged. So on the 5th anniversary of Paris Agreement, these elements can motivate us. In 5 years' time, when we'll celebrate the 10th anniversary of Paris Agreement, we'll have covered much more ground, I'm sure.
Thank you very much, Monica, and thank you for reminding us that, yes, instruments are there, possibilities to work through the institutions are there with the challenges that they may entail. But at the end of the day, it's every one of us as individuals committed to protecting our planet and the future for our future generations. We all have a role to play. So with that, I would want to pass it on back to Marco, again, thanking everyone for their attention and for having me here. Marco, a te. Grazie.
Grazie Flavia Pansieri, grazie.
Thank you so much, Flavia Pansieri, and I'd like to thank the speakers in this second session, Carlo Corazza, Eleonora Evi, and Monica Frassoni. We are also friends. Some of you for some time, some of you more recently, and you're friends and allied in our initiative. There's a question by Stefano Manco. How come that intensive breeding businesses are still being funded? And this is a very important question concerning the inclusion of intensive breeding in the common agricultural policy. There are 19 billion euros allocated to fossil fuel sources. And we can overcome these problems thanks to the European legislation. Of course, this requires time. This involves some obstacles, as emphasized by Carlo Corazza and Eleonora Evi. And also Monica Frassoni mentioned this. With Alberto Maiocchi, Monica Frassoni promoted the European Citizens Initiatives. We collected 50,000 signatures. It's a lot and very little. It's a lot in the current pandemic situation. It's not enough considering the 1 million signatures needed to have a reply by the European Commission, but on occasions like today's webinar and on the occasion of international relationships, humans with Andrea Sanibani, Lorenzo, and all the other persons working on this project, all the actions that we are submitting to the institutions without waiting for the final result in terms of signatures, though we are still working, of course, on signature collection. So we are perfectly on time to close right now the active and proactive celebration of the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. I'd like to thank you all, Antonio, Michael, Virginia, Elena, and all the people who are supporting us on the social media, Stefania, Fabio, Alessandro, Jessica. I hope I'm not forgetting too many of them. And now, of course, you're all invited to sign our initiative, but you are invited to participate also in the picture campaign. Flavia is going to take a picture of her with our logo in front of the Orvieto Cathedral. This is what Mogens Lykketoft did. As former president of the UN General Assembly, he sent us, he posted his picture, he gave the example. And this is how I would like to close this celebration of the 5th year of the Paris Agreement. Thank you so much.